Hi guys, today we're going to take a look at our last example from section 13.5. So this is our last example talking about mutual funds. So I'm on page 23 in your notes. And again, we're taking a look at mutual funds. So example 3 says the ABC Mutual Fund has 400 million worth of stock, 200 million in bonds. Remember, for mutual funds, there's sort of this conglomeration of all these different investment options, and 500,000 in other assets. Total liabilities amount to $10 million, and there are 20 million shares outstanding. Find the NAV of one share. So remember, we had that formula to find the NAV. It's assets minus liabilities divided by number of outstanding shares. So what we want to do is take all of our assets, our 400 million in stocks, and I'm just going to write mil here, plus 200 million in bonds, plus that 500,000 in our other assets. And then we subtract off our 10 million in liabilities and divide by the 20 million in outstanding shares. So once you have this set up, and again, please show me your setup. So on the test or the quiz, if you mistype something in your calculator or you miss a piece of this, I can see what you did know. So once you have your setup, this is a type in the calculator problem. So 400 million plus 200 million plus 500,000 minus 10 million divided by 20 million. So that would give us, for our net asset value, $29.53. Remember, round to the nearest penny. Okay, so this means this is the value of a single share in this mutual fund. The other question, the other type of question I'm going to ask you with a problem like this is, so if you have this amount of money to invest, how many shares could you buy? So how many shares could you buy with $100,000? Well, we're going to take our $100,000 and divide by the cost per share, $29.53, and that would give us $3,386 or 86.96. Now, I almost said dollars there. This is not a dollar amount. I'm asking how many shares, right? How many shares of this mutual fund can I buy? You can't buy a portion of a share. That means if you have a decimal, we're going to have to truncate, cut that decimal off. So 3,386 shares of our mutual fund. That's how many shares I could buy with $100,000. Okay. And that's it for mutual fund. I'm going to ask you to find the NAV, which is that formula that we wrote down on page 21. And I'm going to ask you how many shares can you buy with this amount of money. Okay. We are going to skip example 4. And I want to hop down to the sort of pros and cons list. So we're going to talk about what's good about each of these investments and what's maybe not so good about each of these investments. So for stocks, one advantage of stocks is that they historically, now there are always exceptions to these rules I'm going to give you, but they historically, oops, it would help if I spelled that word correctly. They historically outperform banks. So they tend, in the long run, to do better than if you just put your money in a savings account or a money market or a CD. The other, and not just banks, but other investments as well. Okay, so stocks tend to do well. The other advantage of stocks is that, remember, you are a partial owner of that company, so you have some say. You have those voting rights. Disadvantages tend to be the things that we learn about in history class when we study the 20s, right? So for stocks, those prices, they change, right? They fluctuate. So this week, this stock is a little more expensive or a little less expensive. For this quarter, this company did really well, or for this particular quarter, this company did maybe not so great. So even if I'm just holding on to the stock and collecting dividends, The amount I collect is going to depend on how well that company did, how many iPhones they sold, or how much Coca-Cola people drank. So those prices are going to fluctuate, both the price of the stock and the amount I receive in dividends. The other disadvantage of a stock, which is again something we learned about in history class, is that you can lose part or all of your investment. So if you own shares of a company and that company dissolves or goes bankrupt or in some way ceases to exist, your stock is essentially worthless because that's not a company anymore. So if you were holding on to shares of Toys R Us, you could probably stop worrying about those now, right? Toys R Us is no longer a thing, so any money that you had invested in that company it's gone, it's done. For bonds, okay, this is the one. Remember, bonds are simple interest. A nice thing about bonds is that their interest rates tend to be higher than if you were going to put your money in a savings account. So you get higher interest rates. Bonds also typically carry less risk than stocks. Bonds tend to be more secure than stocks. They're not risk-free though, so you can lose part of your investment if you what's called sell them early. So we talked about that maturity date. So if your bond has a maturity date of 5 years, that means if you wait the full 5 years, you'll collect the full amount of your investment. But if you collect on that bond early, you're not going to get that full interest amount. It's part of your investment if you sell your bond early. So if you need your money more immediately, you're not going to get all the interest. The other thing that maybe you don't think about with a bond is just like a company can go under and you lose money in the stock that you own in that company. If a company declares bankruptcy, the point of bankruptcy is that you are relieved under a lot of conditions. You're relieved of your debt. So that bond would be included in the debt that that company would release. So that means that you're not going to get your payments back. You're not going to get your interest and you're not going to get your initial investment. So you lose money if the issuer, that company or that government, if the issuer declares bankruptcy. Particularly as we've seen this sort of more frequently in the last year or two with some of our major companies, like JCPenney and Toys R Us declaring bankruptcy and ceasing to be companies anymore. That would mean that if you had a bond for those companies, they would not pay you back. So that's a risk with bonds. And then the last major investment that we talked about were mutual funds. So the nice thing about a mutual fund is that your money is handled by a professional. So that means it's this person's job to watch the market, watch for trends, and to be able to invest your money wisely, right? That is their full-time job. And if they don't do a good job, then that impacts their commission, right? Brokers work on commission. The other good thing about a mutual fund is the fact that they're made up of different types of investments, stocks and bonds, and in some cases, maybe shorter term investments. That's called diversification. And that is a good thing when we talk about investments. So I've told you guys a couple times it's not my job to tell you this is good or this is bad, but diversification is a good thing, right? If I only invested in Toys R Us, I'm not feeling so good right now. But if I've invested in a bunch of different areas and a bunch of different corporations in a bunch of different sectors of the market, in a bunch of different avenues, stocks and bonds and other options. Then, if I'm invested in Toys R Us and they cease to be a company, I've taken a little bit of a hit, but it's not everything I've invested. I've sort of mitigated that a little bit. And then the other thing that we see with mutual funds is this property called liquidity. And that essentially means if you no longer want to invest in that mutual fund, you just say, I don't want to invest in this anymore, and you can get your money back out. Now, technically, you can also do this with stocks and bonds, but there could be a sort of a financial hit that you take if you sell a bond early or if you choose to sell a stock when maybe it's not doing so well if it's lower than when you bought it. Some disadvantages of mutual funds because it's handled by a professional, that means you have to pay that commission fee. Mutual funds also have a reputation of having hidden costs. That's why if you ever sign a contract, you should read it very carefully. Okay. And then, depending on how much you invest into a mutual fund, or if you pull money out of it or put money into it at specific times, there are some tax implications there. So your money may be subject to additional taxes. Now, I want to be clear, any money that you make from stocks or from bonds or through any type of investment, even the interest you earn in your savings account, that penny you get every 3 months, that's considered income and it is subject to tax. But there may be some additional tax that applies to money through a mutual fund. Okay, so that's the end of our 13.5 notes. Your homework is posted in Google Classroom. Check that assignment calendar document and let me know if you guys have any questions.